So today we're going to be talking about graphing. And here we have an example of a bar graph that we are going to create using tally marks. So here we have our tally marks. Those are those marks that symbolize a number. So here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then when we put the slash across, that symbolizes 5. So 5, 6 for desert, 5 for Arctic, that's a very cold place, and 5, 10, 14 for the grasslands. So our bar graph is going to be all about animal habitats or places where animals live. So we have a desert, we have the Arctic, and we have the grassland. Looking at our directions, it says complete the bar graph using data provided in the table. So this is our table with our tally marks that we just talked about. So we have to title our graph, and here the data we're given in our table is animal habitat. So I'm going to go ahead and title our bar graph animal habitats. Now earlier we talked about the tally marks and what they mean. So for the desert we said that we have 6 animals living in the desert. So remember 5, 6. So I'm going to go ahead to my bar graph and I am going to place D for desert right here, and then I'm going to shade it to 6. So here's my number, and I'm going to go ahead and shade 6. Another way that you can tell if you are marking your bar graph correctly is by counting the square tiles. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can either go to the number and kind of draw a line across to make sure you're in the right space, or you can count the number of square tiles. So now I'm going to go ahead and shade it in. And the reason we call it a bar graph is because right here, here's a bar symbolizing how many animals live in the desert. Now I'm going to move on to the next habitat that's given to me in our table, and it says that there are 5 animals living in the Arctic. So down here, I'm going to write A for Arctic, and I'm going to go ahead to 5. Now I know that 5 is 1 less than 6, so I'm just going to subtract 1 square tile, or I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shade in my 5 tiles that represent the 5 animals that live in the Arctic habitat. All right, and then for the last piece of information that's on our table is grasslands. So we said that the tally mark, when it has 4 and then a tally across, that stands for 5. So I have 5, 10, 14. So I'm going to go ahead and mark G for grassland. And I'm noticing that 14 is all the way at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my bar, and I'm going to shade it in so that it represents 14. And again, I'm on a computer, so it's not perfect. All right, so when we are graphing, we graph so that we can compare the data or the information that we're given. So just by looking at the graph, if I had to decide which habitat has the most animals, I would say grasslands. If I had to think about which animal has the least just by looking, it would be the Arctic habitat. But let's take a look at some of the questions that we may get asked. So here it says, how many more animals? So that's an important word that I'm going to go ahead and circle. How many more animals live in the grasslands and the Arctic habitats combined than in the desert? So that means that I'm taking the grasslands and the Arctic and I need to add them together and then subtract from how many are in the desert. So that's a lot of work. You have to make sure that you read super carefully. So it says, how many more animals live in the grasslands and the Arctic habitats combined, right? So that tells us we have to put them together, than in the desert. So if I have to look here, I know that there are 14 that live in the grassland, and there are 5 that live in the Arctic. So I'm going to go ahead and add them together, and that gives me 19, which is the Arctic and the grassland. But I also know that there are 6 animals that live in the desert. So my second step is to take 19, and I'm going to subtract 6. So 19 represents what is in the Arctic and the grassland, and 6 represents what is in the desert. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract, and that's going to give me 13. So there are 13 more animals in the Arctic and the grassland than there is in the desert. Now, just to make sure that my math is correct, we know that the inverse operation of subtraction is addition. So I'm going to go ahead and add 13 plus 6 to make sure that I'm going to get 19. And I did. So this lets me know that I checked. This was my first step, and this was my second step. So I'm going to write right on this line 13. Now let's take a look at our next question. So it says, if 3 more grassland animals and 4 more Arctic animals are added to the graph, how many grasslands and Arctic animals would there be? All right, so let's kind of break up this question here. So it says, if 3 more grasslands and 4 more Arctic are added to the graph, how many grasslands and Arctic animals would there be? So I know that there are 14 grassland animals, and there are 5 Arctic animals. So if I take 3 and I add it to 14, that's going to give me 17. And if I add 3, nope, we're not adding 3. We have to read carefully. We're adding 4. If I add 4 here, that's going to give me 9. So I would have a total of 17 grassland and 9 Arctic. And we need to add those together to get our total. So 17 plus 9 is going to give us what? Well, I know that 9 and 7 is 16. So 16 has 6 ones, and then I move my 10 into the tens place, and that gives me 26. So there's a total of 26 grasslands and Arctic animals if we add 3 and 4 to each. So I'm going to go ahead and write 26. Can anyone think of another way that we could do it? So if you said that the first step we could take is to add them together, you are correct, and then add 7. So let's take a look and see if we get the same answer, if we get 26. So if we have 14 grassland and 5 Arctic, that gives us a total of 19. And then we add 7 because we're adding 3 more grassland and 4 more Arctic. Are we still going to get 26? Yes, we are. So either way works. You just have to figure out what works best for you. All right, let's take a look at the very last question. So it says, if 3 animals were removed, so what does remove mean to you if we're using the word removed? If you said take away, you are correct. When we remove something, we take it away. So if 3 animals are removed from each category, so we have 3 categories. We have desert, Arctic, and grasslands. How many would there be? So let's look at the graph. We currently have 6 in the desert, so we would need to subtract 3 or remove 3, and that's going to give us an answer. We have 5 in the Arctic, so if we have 5 and we take away 3, that's going to give us an answer. And then we have 14 and we take away 3. What answer is that going to give us? So let's look at that question again. If 3 animals were removed or taken away from each category, how many animals would there be? So remember that this is each a category: a desert, the Arctic, and the grasslands. So let's take a look. 6 minus 3 is 3. 5 minus 3 is 2. And 14 minus 3 is 11. So we would have 6 desert animals, 2 Arctic animals, and 11 grassland animals.